Good morning. Our reading today comes from Genesis, chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work that He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. Holy God, we thank You for this worship. We thank You for this word. And in this word today, may we find the hope we have in You and in our rest. Amen. Every one of us, we have one of these on our car. A warning light. On every automobile, on the dashboard, there are warning lights to warn you when there's something wrong with your engine. Could be you have low oil pressure. Could be that the check engine light is coming on. Could be that you have low tire pressure. Did you know that it's important? You know it's important to pay attention to the warning lights on your dashboard before a problem becomes a bigger problem or becomes even more dangerous. Did you know that the average American will wait more than a month and a half before they take their car in for service when the check engine light comes on? A high percentage of us. In fact, I know one pastor, not me, but I know one pastor who said he was too busy to take his car to the shop to get repaired to check on the check engine light. 6 months went by, so he came up with a good solution. He just took a piece of black electrical tape and put it over the check engine light. He soon realized it was not a good strategy when he was standing on the side of the road because his engine seized up and he had to get a new engine for his car. Now, some people, none of you I'm sure, many of us will wait till there's three warning lights before we take the car into the shop. Now, don't judge me. I'm one of those people. 3 warning lights, a check engine light and 2 other lights, I didn't know what they were, came up on my Ford Explorer. And I learned there was a good reason why those 3 lights were coming up on my car. When my car stalled one morning on the side of the road during dark, before daylight. Took the car to the shop. 24 hours later, the mechanic called and said, "Well, Pastor David, are you excited about getting a new car?" But there's another kind of warning light that I'm more concerned about. Before I go on, let me ask a question. Did anybody drive to church with a warning light on their car this morning? Several of you. I say, don't raise your hand. There's always someone, right? But the warning light I'm concerned about is another warning light that we avoid, that we ignored. And it's a warning light in our heart, soul, mind, and spirit. This engine, my body, my mind, my soul, my spirit. We are all given warning lights. And how many warning lights in your mind, body, soul, and spirit have to start flashing before you pay attention? Before anyone burns out at work, before anyone has a moral failure, before anyone gets involved in an affair, before anyone ends up on a hospital bed in an emergency room, before anyone ends up losing their job, before anyone ends up totally exhausted, hitting rock bottom, before anyone has an emptiness in their faith and life and a lack of purpose, there are going to be warning signs. And the warning signs are exhaustion and fatigue and fear and worry and anxiety and depression. When I was in my early 30s, I served a church that had 35 people in worship. Barbara Gilwer was a member of our church. We had 35 people in worship. Didn't take very long. Over just a few years, we were soon worshiping 400 people in worship, from 35 to 400. My problem was that I continued to try to pastor the church the same way I did with 35 people as at 400 people. Tried to be everyone to everything and to every person, and end up being no one to anyone or anything. I tried to do all the pastoral calling. I would go to the hospital, sit all the way through the surgery. Every person that visited the church, I would go by their home and visit with them. I was still making house calls on members of our church. I preached 48 of the 52 sermons a year. And what I learned was, the more I worked, the more there was to do. And the more I worked, the more I disappointed the people around me. After a while, there were as many people leaving the church as there were people joining the church, because I didn't know how to use others to involve our leaders or to work with our staff. And so I had trouble sleeping. I was consumed with anxiety. I was on edge all the time. I worried all the time. I just wanted to get an escape, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And I remember one day, I was totally exhausted and frustrated. I was working as hard as I could, and it seemed like things were going another direction. So I went down to the mall down the street and thought this would help. I bought a giant cookie from a cookie store and a large Pepsi, and sat down just to sort of gather myself together. But when I sat down, I felt like I was still moving. And literally, I can still remember this moment as clear as day. You've ever been on a tilt-a-whirl at the fair? It was like my head, on the inside of my head, my mind was spinning. And I remember later that day, my son, who was 3 at the time, grabbed my face and said, "Daddy, will you just look at me?" I couldn't focus on anyone or anything. I don't know how long it was after that this occurred, but one morning, Teresa had to take me to the emergency room because I was feeling tightness in my chest, pain in my chest, and I was having trouble breathing. Well, the doctor said to me, he said, you don't have a heart problem. He said, you either have gas or you're having a panic attack. And he said, it's probably both. And then he said, let me say it one more time and let me be very clear to you. You don't have a problem with your heart. You have a problem with the way that you're doing life. Anybody else ever hear that? So, I remember thinking to myself, part of my problem is this. I love my job. Part of it is the nature of the work. But I have a bigger problem. Hello, my name is David Emery. I'm a workaholic. Dallas Willard is an author who's written a lot about the spiritual life and the spiritual disciplines. And he said that hurry, busyness, is the enemy of the spiritual life. And if you want to enjoy the abundant life God has for you, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And so there I was, sitting in the emergency room, looking at my wife, and in that moment, I made a decision that I was going to live differently. And I made a decision, and from that moment on, for the rest of my life, I have achieved a healthy life-work balance. Not at all. Not one bit. It's always been a struggle for me. I'm wired that way. Do you recognize this list? You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Honor your mother and your father. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet. Do you know what those are? Of course you reckon. Those are the 10 Commandments. But did you know that there's one of the 10 Commandments that we habitually break and are consistently rewarded for breaking? Which one do you think it is? Keep the Sabbath day holy. Because we live in a culture that is hyper-focused on hyper-driven focus on performance and achievement. And we're rewarded, and actually, workaholism is actually rewarded and considered a virtue. The funny thing for me is, the more our church grew and the less good I felt about myself and the more exhausted and tired I was, the more I was getting rewarded and the more I was being patted on the back. You know, we live in a world where busyness is seen as a status symbol. We live in a time when a good hot meal is chicken nuggets and an SUV between soccer practice, dance practice, and field hockey. We live in a time where a few years ago you had to get up from your home, get in your car, and drive to work. Now work starts the moment we wake up and pick up our smartphone and we turn it on because now work has come home. 86% of all Americans work more than 45 hours a week. And we work more than anybody else in the industrialized world. We've always worked more than the French. We even now work more than the Japanese. And the Japanese have a term for what I'm talking about, this sort of soul-killing life without rest. It's called karoshi. And karoshi means death by overwork. When we don't pay attention to the warning lights on our engine of our mind, soul, and spirit, we die. We die from exhaustion and fatigue, and it kills the soul, and we lose our ability to just wonder, to delight, to breathe. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. The fourth commandment, it is a commandment, but it also is an invitation to a fuller, richer life. Notice at the very beginning of the book of Genesis, it says that God hovered over the formless void of the earth, hovered over the seas, the watery chaos, and brought life and order to the creation when He spoke and said, "Let there be light." And then God got to work. 6 consecutive days in a row of work, pushing the mountains up out of the earth, forming the caverns for the great seas of the earth, putting vegetation and life, all the living things God created on each day of creation. And then the ultimate act of creation, God created human beings in God's own image, the Imago Dei, meaning that we have been created in the image of God. And at the end of each day of work, God looked at all God created and said, "Oh, it is good." And then notice, on the 7th day, God surveyed everything that God had created, and then it says that God rested. Now, I want you to pay attention to that. Notice what it says, God rested. But David, I've got a deadline. But David, I have responsibilities. But David, we have soccer practice and field hockey. But David, no, listen. God rested after 6 days of work. The God who created the heavens and the earth, the God who is the source of infinite energy and creativity, who never grows tired or weary, who never gets grumpy, anxious, irritable, or grouchy, that God rested. And the word rest there in the Hebrew is the word Shabbat. It's where the word Sabbath comes from. And this is what the word means. It means to cease, to stop, to wonder, to delight, to celebrate, to have a rhythm in your life where we celebrate our lives, where we take a deep breath and we wonder and we rest and delight and we celebrate our family, our friends, our world, our life, and our God. What it means is it's a period of time where God has my full attention. It's a period of time where my family has my full attention. It's a period of time where I shut off my phone, I'm trying, and don't answer emails, I don't respond to texts. It's a time where I don't have a to-do list and where I don't do anything, I don't have to accomplish anything, and I don't feel guilty about it. It's a time where I don't have to buy anything or sell anything. I don't need anything more because I'm going to enjoy what it is that I have now, and I'm going to express my gratitude and be thankful for what I have and breathe and live. How's that going for you? John Mark Comer, and I'm learning a lot from him. He's a great teacher. He wrote a book called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry about his own experience with burnout. And this is what he says. I love this quote. He says, "The Sabbath is a day for the celebration of life in God's very good world. After 6 days of universe sculpting work, God rested. And in so doing, he built a rhythm into creation itself. We work for 6 days, and then we rest for one. And this cadence of work and rest is just as vital to our humanness as food, or water, or sleep, or oxygen. It's mandatory for survival, to say nothing of flourishing. I am not a machine." Will you repeat after me? I am not a machine. One more time. I can't work 7 days a week. I'm a human. All I do is work for 6 days and then rest for one, just like God, on whose image I bear. If we were created in the image of God, then we are called upon to model who God is, which is this rhythm of work and rest. Now, hold on one more minute, and let me look at two words in this passage that are so instructive. Blessed and holy. In this passage, 3 times God blesses something in the first chapter of Genesis. God blesses all the living animals. He blesses them and says, "Go be fruitful and multiply." The second thing God blesses are human beings. He blesses them and says, "Go be fruitful and multiply." Then God blesses the Sabbath, the day of rest, which is a day to be fruitful and to multiply. What that means is that when we rest, that's where we get creative. Creativity comes from rest. Imagination comes from rest. Wonder comes from rest. Have you ever had a problem that you couldn't solve? A letter that you had to write, or a business deal you had to make, a family situation that required some engineering. And the more you pressed, the tighter your shoulders got, and the further away an answer to your problem came. And so then you just let it go. Exhausted, wrung out in sweat. You went and you took a nap. You went on a run. You went on a hike through Turkey Mountain. You got a good night's sleep. You went out with some friends and had some wine and some good food, and you woke up the next day refreshed, and there it was, the answer. So many times in my life, I have pressed and pressed and pressed and pressed, but the answer came when I stopped pressing and just rested. The second word is the word holy. The word holy means to be set apart, to set something apart. And when God says that the day of rest is also holy, what that means is it's a day that we set apart, a period of time we set apart every week for God, for worship. It's not just rest. It's not just a day off, go to the lake, have a few beers, watch a bunch of Netflix, work in the yard. No, it's more than that. It's this combination of work and rest. And we see this modeled by God, this rhythm of work, rest and worship, rest and worship, rest and worship, rest and worship. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I don't get up and go to work anymore. All I do is rest. How does this apply to me as a retired person? It does. Because just like a person that works 7 days a week, every day looks the same. You work, you're busy, every day looks the same. But when you're retired, it's very easy to get into a rhythm where every day looks the same. The Sabbath is a special day that looks different from all the other days. And you too, like anyone else, you need a day that looks different from all the other days. And we forget, we have agency. We get to choose. Now let me tell you what I'm wondering about. I could be wrong. I have no research to prove it. But I'm good at making observations. And it's a true fact that teenagers today, young people today, are struggling with anxiety and fear and depression in epidemic levels. Suicide, fear, depression, social anxiety, and not all children, but a lot of children that I'm talking about have more at their disposal, more possessions, more stuff, more things to do than any generation before them, yet they're the most anxious generation perhaps in human history. Why is that? Could it be that it has something to do with the fact that we have overscheduled their lives? I'm going to get in trouble now. That we don't give them any room to just be children, to have free play? Could it be that we have elevated other things above their spiritual life and we have valued other things other than their spiritual life? And could it be that this mix of living overscheduled lives combined with very little consistent focus on their spiritual life, combined with social media, is a toxic mix? I don't know. I'm just wondering. Could it be? And you know what? God forbid that we are pushing our children or grandchildren up some ladder that they weren't meant to climb. So one day they reach their 30s and their 40s, they're at the top of the ladder that you gave them to climb, and they got to the top and said, "This isn't my life." And then because we've given them no spiritual foundation for their life, they have no ability to assess where they are. They're just up top with nowhere to go. God forbid that we send our children and youth up a ladder that we already found out went nowhere. I got to tell you, I don't know how to do this. I wish I could stand up here and tell you that, back when I had that experience in life that I figured it all out. I haven't. I still struggle with it. I wish I could stand up here and tell you that David Emery has figured out this rhythm of rest and work adequately. I wish I could stand up here and tell you, here are the benefits of Sabbath. I did this, I've made this choice, I've been doing it for over a year now, and here are the benefits of healthy happiness that David Emery's achieved. I can't do it because I haven't modeled it. I do it at times, did it this weekend, and I feel very fresh and alive. But I tend to be one of those people who work to the point of exhaustion, and that's honestly why I got COVID. I was at the point of exhaustion because I just like to work, and I work all the time, and I can't rest. My immune system was down, and I just got sick and couldn't get back. God goes, pay attention to the warning lights on your dash, Mr. Emery. I don't know how. But I do know this, that the Sabbath is an invitation to a different way of living. It's un-American, it's countercultural, but it is the way to life. And there's a passage, and in summary, I want to give you this story at the end of this message. Jesus practiced Sabbath. And all of Jesus' healings happened on the Sabbath. In this story, in Luke chapter 13, a woman walks into the synagogue on the Sabbath bent over, walking like this, bent over for 18 years. And then Jesus touches her, and she's healed, and she stands up straight. I can't help but wonder and feel, to know and to believe, that whenever we practice Sabbath, we meet the one who went before us. And so we walk the Sabbath all bent over. The warning lights are all flashing. And then in that space of worship and Sabbath and rest, the Creator God puts His hands on us and stands us up so that we can breathe and we can live.